Podcastera.mx presenta.
Soy Angélica Íñiguez. Estás escuchando Corpusapiens, el podcast que va del cuerpo a la danza. Una producción original de Podcastera.mx. Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Les doy la más cordial bienvenida a todas las personas que se están conectando en este momento a este video. Estoy muy contenta porque hoy vamos a estar charlando con un artista que tiene un trabajo impresionante, súper interesante. Es un artista interdisciplinario que, bueno, él es coreógrafo, es bailarín, es director escénico y trabaja también en el cine, con artistas plásticos, siempre hace colaboraciones con artistas plásticos para sus montajes, con músicos, es director de pasarelas también. Él es de origen belga-francés y ha trabajado con artistas como Sasha Waltz, como Marina Abramovic, como Tom York de Radiohead. Es coreógrafo de la película Suspiria y también con la compañía de Pina Bausch. Actualmente trabaja con la Ópera de París y tiene 4 piezas girando a nivel mundial. Es el coreógrafo de Madonna, quizá ya saben quién es, y también el gobierno francés lo nombró Caballero de la Orden de las Artes y las Letras en 2013. Sí, exactamente, estoy hablando de Damien Jalet. Voy a platicar con él acerca de una producción que se va a presentar próximamente en Guadalajara, en el Conjunto Santander, y esta es la obra Omphalos, que es una pieza escénica donde la danza es la protagonista y el coreógrafo es ni más ni menos que Damien Jalet. Esta obra fue creada originalmente con 20 bailarines mexicanos del CEPRODAC. Hoy cambió un poco el elenco, pero 16 de esos 20 bailarines siguen participando en esta pieza. Se estrenó en 2018, hace 5 años, en el Centro Nacional de las Artes. Y esta vez, bueno, tuvo varias funciones, ha tenido 19 funciones, tanto en México como a nivel mundial, en otros países, especialmente de Europa. Y después paró sus funciones a partir de los años de pandemia. Y esta vez, la productora Moves, que es dirigida por Eleno Guzmán, y el Conjunto Santander se encargaron de hacer nuevamente la producción. El remontaje corrió a cargo de Catalina Navarrete, que es una dramaturga o fue la dramaturga de esta pieza y que trabajó muy cerca en todo el proceso de investigación de Damien, porque Damien estuvo en México durante 3 meses haciendo una residencia artística en la que para él fue muy importante hacer este proceso de encontrarse con un país que no era el suyo, con México. Bueno, estuvo viviendo en la Ciudad de México y tuvo un grupo, un colectivo conformado por antropólogos, arqueólogos. Ya nos va a platicar cómo fue el proceso de creación de esta pieza. Le vamos a estar preguntando algunos detalles. Y bueno, nada más decir un dato curioso, que en esta nueva producción de Omphalos se creó una antena nueva, construyeron una antena, la antena pesa, es un plato que pesa 3 toneladas y está hecho de metal y madera. Bueno, y ya voy a parar de hablar, le voy a dar la bienvenida a Damien. Solo antes quiero decir que Adriana Esparza, que está aquí, va a ser la encargada de hacer la traducción al español. Muchas gracias, Adriana, por estar aquí. Y pues, Damien, I'm feeling very grateful to have this conversation with you. I think it's gonna be very nourishing for all audiences, especially Mexican audiences, for people who love dance, performance, cinema, fashion, art in general. And thank you for accepting this interview and welcome.
Gracias. Glad to speak with you.
Let me first to do the intro of Omphalos in Spanish, please. Omphalos es un vocablo griego que significa en el ombligo del mundo. También toma este mito griego en el que Zeus envía a 2 águilas, una en cada extremo del mundo, y desde ahí vuelan y ese lugar donde se juntarán será el ombligo del mundo. Este mito lo entrecruza con los símbolos mexicanos del águila y la serpiente y con esta idea, con este significado etimológico de México, que es en el ombligo de la luna. A partir de esto surge la obra Omphalos. Como les decía, después de una residencia de 3 meses, en la que realizó una investigación con un equipo multidisciplinario conformado por un antropólogo, un chamán, una arqueóloga, estuvieron en el Ajusco y él, a partir de sus impresiones y de este trabajo, fue que creó este montaje. So, Temia, what is that common thread between both myths, the Greek with the two eagles and the Mexican with symbols of eagle and snake? What is Omphalos about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a long story. I mean, just to bring back to the genesis of the piece, I think I came in 2010 in Mexico to teach a workshop. Eleno had invited me by then, and we already started to talk about the idea of creating a work. It took us nearly 8 years to get there. 8 years actually. And I don't know, I came a few times to Mexico before, and I think Mexico is one of these countries that there is few like this that literally that changes something in you. And I felt, especially not the first time I came, but the second time and then the third time, there was something that I was like, it would be very interesting to create something here. I mean, in general, I love volcanic places. I love places that shakes. I love places where culture had to adjust to nature in a way. And I guess I was always fascinated by the relationship of pre-Columbian civilization to time and to cosmos. In general, I'm a huge fan of cosmology, whether it's mythological cosmology or more scientific cosmology, and I always believe that the stage is a place when you can connect science and mythology. Usually there are two very distinct sciences or like disciplines, but I feel the stage is a place where you can actually you can be scientific, but you don't have to have necessarily the scientific mind of like being hyper rational about things, and sometimes mythology and science are just a way to try to explain things that literally overwhelms us and that we can barely apprehend. And each of them, sometimes you can find connection between conclusions or between beliefs that are ancestral and actually science that is extremely contemporary. I'm giving a lot of information already to translate. I don't know if you, Adriana, if you already follow me in that, maybe I'll leave you translating that.
Bueno, él se remonta a los orígenes de la pieza en sus primeras visitas a México, que le cautivó mucho la manera de vivir aquí. Menciona que le gustan mucho los lugares volcánicos, los lugares donde hay mucho movimiento de la naturaleza, donde las sociedades se tienen que adaptar a convivir con la naturaleza y le apasiona mucho esta visión de, por una parte, lo científico y por una parte, la cosmogonía, especialmente en México, la precolombina, donde se hace esta relación que son como dos visiones para vivir el mundo, para adaptarse a él. Y él considera que en el escenario es el espacio perfecto para conjuntar la parte científica y la parte mitológica, donde no se tiene que ser hiperracional, sino se puede establecer como este vínculo entre esas dos disciplinas que pueden parecer distintas.
And I think I came with, like, basically I always like to, when I start a creation, I never want to anticipate too much what it's going to be until the moment before. Like I always, the previous work I've done, when I finish a piece, I feel it has brought me in a certain place, and I often start from that place to create a new one. In the case of Omphalos, I had just finished an opera called Péléas and Mélisande, the first opera I created, and it was a collaboration with Sidi Larbi Sharkawi and Marina Abramovic, and we had created this set that was we took this very medieval story to an early futuristic tale, and into a kind of a metaphor of the vision, something also that was like the whole set had this curve. It was like being inside of a planetarium or somehow with a window towards a kind of an infinite. And I guess it's also like some technique have been developed as a dancer when I've been always inspired by centrifugal force, and therefore by the axis and the axis we have in us, our center of gravity, and how by creating a technique where you generate certain impulsion and you have to let certain reaction happen. So for me, it's still the process of many years of practice and of exploration physically. But I guess I really wanted to work on this cosmic perspective. Like, I guess also because it's something that I felt resonated very much with how what I could project on Mexico and what I had learned from Mexico. But at the same time, I didn't want to make it I definitely didn't want to come there and make a piece, about elements from Mexico. I just felt it would be interesting to again use mythology as a departure point, but then to create a kind of a contemporary mythology. I knew that my first keyword was the notion of axis mundi, the idea that in many cultures and in many mythologies, there's an axis that connects the lower world to the higher world. And it's something I had already explored with Japanese mythology when I was working with Kohei Nawa. But I got really fascinated how in so many cultures you find this idea of axis. I'll let you translate, Adriana.
Ok. Bueno, menciona que le interesaba mucho esta parte del origen de los mitos, como el eje del mundo que menciona aquí en México, en otras culturas, en un proyecto que tuvo en Japón. También encuentra como en muchas culturas del mundo se encuentra este eje como que conecta el mundo bajo con el mundo alto, por llamarlo de alguna manera, y fue de ahí de donde quiso partir para este proyecto de Omphalos. Venía de también realizar una producción de Peleas y Melisandre con Sidi Larbi Cherkawi y Marina Abramovic, en el que habían representado una especie de planetario, una especie de mirador, digamos, hacia el cosmos, y fue de ahí de donde tomó el punto de partida para crear algo que no fuera necesariamente como tomar aspectos de México per se, sino un poquito mostrar esta idea de la cosmovisión y de este eje del mundo que parte un poco los dos mundos en diferentes culturas.
I knew I didn't want to call the piece Axis Mundi because I thought it was not that an inspiring title. I started looking for parallel, like synonyms or like related words to that to that concept, and I came up with I bumped into the word Omphalos, which I found was in itself an interesting word. And then the visual aspect, when I saw it was in Delphi, and it had this kind of this representation. There's few Omphalos. They are considered like the navel of the world, the axis, and the structure of it is curved. It's quite a kind of primitive, but very singular shape. And then when I started reading about the mythology, I thought it was interesting, this idea that two eagles were sent by Zeus on each side of the world, and then the place where they met defined its axis, the center. And then he dropped a stone, and the stone got represented and protected by a snake. But I had no idea that actually at the time when I said, like, I wrote to Eleno, I said I would like to call the piece Omphalos, which means navel. And he told me, but do you know that Mexico means navel of the world? And when I suddenly it was clear that the even the flag of Mexico is this eagle holding a snake in its mouth. And then he told me about the myth of Mexico, which is crazily kind of beautifully resonating with that story of the Omphalos, this idea that the gods against told the people, where you will see a snake holding an eagle holding a snake in its mouth. That means this is the place where it's the center of the world. That's the place where you need to build your city. And I thought that was an incredible first coincidence when we started to, and I was like, wow, it was pure intuition. But that for me, that made me think those myths, and it's to Carl Jung, for me, says that it's a quote that he said that I always kind of found it extremely inspiring. He said, like, if humanity from one moment to another would forget about it, or would even disappear and would start again, the same unconscious, the same myth would come back. And that sometimes I feel like we have this kind of hard disk that connects us all, and that express itself in sometimes extremely specific symbols. And I felt that the symbol of the snake, of the eagle, and the navel of the world, like, to have those three means that this story is extremely old, and probably to a moment where, because at that time, Mexico and Greece, there was no like plane connection back then. There was no internet. Those civilizations were extremely isolated. So it means that it comes probably from even before, from a place that, so I found this is really beautiful as a metaphor to the unconscious of the world, and the fact that we, beyond even our rationality, beyond what we know, there's already a knowledge that we all share.
Sí, menciona esta relación tan interesante entre los mitos griegos y los mitos mexicanos, como por ejemplo el hecho de la serpiente, del ombligo, refiriéndose al centro del mundo, al centro en el caso de México, que es el ombligo de la luna. Es como este centro, este origen de un mito que se comparte a través de las culturas, independientemente de que México y Grecia en aquellos momentos no tenían ninguna manera de comunicarse, de relacionarse, pero Damien piensa que hay una especie de conocimiento que tenemos los seres humanos como desde el origen de la civilización, ciertas ideas, ciertas nociones que compartimos, y que eso es como algo que relaciona a las culturas a pesar de que las distancias y los tiempos no las conecten realmente, ¿no?
Can you tell us about your artistic residence in Mexico City? How was the sensory experience, the research? What enriched you? And what surprises did you encounter during your time in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this creation of Omphalos was definitely something I had to go through in my parcours. I think it's definitely, I've learned so much doing it. It was not at all, and everybody was part of this project can attest that it was extremely challenging for everyone to create a project of that scale and of that ambition. And I guess for me, when it started with this kind of coincidence and this kind of discovery, it kind of went a little bit. There's been so many elements in the creation where I felt, wow, this process is so intuitive, and there's so much resonance I found between certain creative idea and actually myth that I discovered later, that I felt very. It was a very exciting time. I remember I was a little bit restless when I was there. I mean, I think the city itself being so high, the air for me is missing. When I arrive immediately, I feel that I'm gasping for air. There is this energy that I found in Mexico that I found extremely unique to this place. I came, I guess, end of July 2018. And I met Jean-Paul Espagna, who's kind of one of the only collaborator I brought from abroad, together with Emilio Sarapoglu, who has been working with me extremely closely, and who's going to come now to help to restage the piece. And we started doing a kind of a trip in different places. We went to different Mayan temple, and we went also to Guatemala, to Tikal. And we met even some shamans, like in the south of the country, close to Merida. We also visited some place like some cenote that consider like, again, like a bit like the access like a kind of a connection to the underworld. I so we did these trips. I always remember there was something really, really special that came when we were in Tikal, because I had this intuition from the beginning, because I mean one of the great inspiration for this piece is the ritual of the voladores. This idea when I'm talking about the axis, I mean my work is very access to gravity and to centrifugal force. So when I discovered like this four men like defining the four direction attached by the feet and letting themselves go down with the centrifugal force, I was stunned. Like, I mean, there's been another ritual that's been a Japanese one where men cut big trees and ride themselves, go down like the mountain, and those trees are used as protective pillars. I felt there was a huge connection between those rituals. But I remember that we went to visit the temple, which was, of course, very impressive. But I remember I had this intuition that at one point, because we worked with this idea of a parabolic antenna, I was imagining that at one point all the dancers had this kind of umbilical that would connect the head to the center of the parabolic antenna. But then at one point I was like, maybe at one point the center could rise and it could all become like the shape that completes the parabolic antenna. This kind of, that has a little bit the shape of the voladores. And I remember I was like, well, that's kind of a bit of a far-fetched idea. And I was like, I don't know if that's, if I really didn't, it was again like pure intuition, something that you can't really rationally explain. But I remember that we were in a shop, like Jean-Paul was like kind of looking for this kind of this kind of fabrics and stuff, because there's this, they make this kind of embroidery over there. And I was like in the corner of that shop, and suddenly I get this book in my hand. It was an English written book about called The Mayan God. And I opened it, and the title was The Umbilical of the World, The Umbilical of the World. And then I bought it, and on the trip back, I started reading it. And it was really beautiful, because they were saying that the Mayan believed that we all had a kind of an invisible umbilical thread that from the top of the head that would connect us to one point under the Milky Way. And I was like, this is really crazy, because it was exactly that very specific idea that I thought we should do with this thing. And that from that point, I was like convinced it had to be part of the show. But I really, it was also random, the fact that to find this book, and like, I don't want to sound too spooky in this interview, but I would say the creation was full of this kind of details. The fact that the company, there were 20 dancers, and 20 is a unit in pre-Columbian, like the 20 is an important number. And all this, I felt there was I think also we started the creation, the actual date of like the creation of the world in Mayan mythology, which is somewhere between end of July or no, beginning of August actually. There was a lot of beautiful sign like this that I felt I felt we were doing a bit of archaeological work. When I arrived in Mexico, I remember doing this trip, I could only see the millions of parabolic antennas that were everywhere. When we rehearsed, we had to go in the to rehearse in a cinema set, because the dance studio were too small to include the set. So we went in Ajusco, 3,500 meters high, next to the volcano, which is also kind of considered like the actual one of the axes of the world. And we were so high, and we create in the piece this core, and dancers are really, they are doing all this breath work, and I felt like, oh my god, it's just so, there's no air here. So it made even more sense. Like I felt this was like a training camp, where basically if they could do it there, they could definitely do it lower in the city. We were just already 1,000 meters above the city. So all of this, there's all these beautiful anecdotes that kind of, that I could narrate about the creation of this work, which has been super challenging, but constantly with this little kind of beautiful connection. And I think Mexico has this kind of where, vibrant feeling where, things work a bit in a subconscious way. Like the people are often easily traversed. I feel in the culture there's been always a desire for hallucinogenic experience also, of something to get a higher perspective. So yeah, this is what I could say. Sorry, I've talked a lot, Adriana. It's a great exercise, but I'll let you speak.
Bueno, menciona de bueno, la pregunta de Angie era específicamente sobre su experiencia en la residencia en la Ciudad de México y un poquito todo este trabajo de desarrollo del proyecto y como qué anécdotas fueron las que lo marcaron, ¿no? Bueno, y Damien comenta junto con el diseñador de vestuario, Jean-Paul Lespagnard, y a Emilio Zarpaglu, el asesor
Arapoglu.
coreográfico.
Arapoglu.
Ah, Arapoglu.
Arapoglu, yeah.
eh, que bueno, estuvieron viviendo diferentes experiencias como para desarrollar el concepto de la obra. Menciona específicamente que fueron a Tikal, la visita al templo fue algo que lo dejó muy marcado. Fueron a un cenote, que específicamente los cenotes son esta conexión como al mundo subterráneo, las profundidades, retomando este concepto del ombligo y de la relación entre el mundo bajo y el mundo alto. Eh, y también la experiencia de ver a los voladores de Papantla. El concepto dice que le atrae mucho el concepto de la gravedad en la danza y bueno, el hecho de la danza de los voladores cómo van desenredándose y van cayendo, y que eso fue algo que lo marcó mucho, cómo están todos unidos al poste central, y coincidentemente lo relacionó en su visita por México, le llamaban mucho la atención las antenas parabólicas por todos lados, y encontró como esa relación entre considerando, digamos, a los voladores, este cordón umbilical que los une al centro, y pensando en esto de las antenas parabólicas fue que decidió incorporarlas en el proyecto y hacer como que todos los danzarines tenían esta conexión a esa antena, ¿no? Dice que estuvieron probando en el Ajusco, se fueron al Ajusco practicar con los bailarines, y decía que realmente le pareció una experiencia muy interesante verlos como por la altitud les costaba un poco de trabajo el esfuerzo físico, la respiración, y era como parte de este proyecto de conectarse con un mundo un poquito más allá, ¿no? Menciona también como en México considera que es una parte importante los rituales, un poquito, digamos, alucinógenos, en el que uno se trata de poner en un nivel de conciencia superior, digamos, para tener como esta relación especial con el mundo, ¿no?
And how was working with Mexican dancers? How was the reassembly with this new cast? There are 16 original dancers, plus 4 new dancers, 6 or 7 years later. And I understand you live now in Manchester?
No. I'm currently in Manchester for work. I live in Brussels. Right now I'm in London.
Okay.
But I'm each day in a different place, so it's gonna be hard for you to understand where I am. I don't know it myself. I'm based in Brussels, yeah, but I'm gonna be in Paris for a month now, and yeah. Sorry.
Well, and you didn't come to the reassembly. How was that process?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately I would so much want to be in Mexico right now to restage the piece and to make sure that the dancers also, the new dancers, in general, when I work with dancers, there is a very technical side of the work and very precise in terms of like the different dynamics, the principles that we're working with. But I also feel that dancers need to be also nourished on all the kind of invisible lines that structure the work, and also they need to be charged, not just technically. There's always, I often think a performance is a kind of a contemporary ritual, and a ritual always has a function, and I do believe that for each performer it has to be a different function. Maybe there's a global function for the piece, and there is my invisible skeleton of why certain things are there. But I also never want it to be, univocal. For me, for example, a performance needs to be completed by the audience. So it's never just my vision only. It's let's say a connection with different artists. I'm channeling different things together. I'm guiding and try to fuse all these elements together. But also I feel the dancers need to know why they are doing it for themselves, and they need to understand on a personal level what the piece means for them. So, and I think that's participate to make the work also more complete and to the dancers to be more engaged to them. So I remember that when we did the creation, we tried also with Catalina, that came with a lot of stories, a lot of some images. We talked about the Lord of Times, we talked about the Lord of Space. Like there was this idea of a piece where humanity keeps on transforming. In pre-Columbian mythology, humanity has been created 3 times in 3 different materials, and I like the idea that there is for the piece has the Lord. There's this Lord of Space, which are a bit connected to the voladores that open the space and give the 4 cardinal points. And once this happens, they bring the Lords of Time, which are basically going to keep on evolving. The Lord of Space remain exactly the same through the whole piece, but the Lord of Space, but the Lord of Times, they keep on morphing and transforming. And so that was one of the dramaturgical construction that we use in this piece of an hour. I in general, I remember my first impression working with them, it was like a boiling room with people with crazy intense energy. That I remember my first thing was like, okay, let's actually do what the piece needs to get everybody back to one axis, because it was going in so many different directions. I loved working with this group. I think also when we performed the piece abroad, I think it was very moving because they all come from one place. Usually when I work with different companies, people come from all over the world. They come from this. Usually in dance, we work with extremely international cast, except for some project I did in Japan, or where we had mostly Japanese dancers. But I do think when everybody comes from the same space, there's already a connection that is stronger than that. It's something I could not even control or whatever. It was there was a natural bond and a natural connection. The language is the same. I felt also like, because I understand Spanish, but I don't really speak it, so it was interesting to try to canalize everybody and to try to really at one point, more than going out, because the energy was very out. I wanted them to start bring it more, the energy towards in, so that also the piece would have a little bit this kind of vacuum feeling, something where it's not just project as you, it also pulls you in. I'm sorry again, I spoke so much. Adriana, just
It's okay.
your hand, please.
Bueno, le pregunta a Angie un poco cómo fue el proceso de trabajar con los bailarines mexicanos. Y bueno, en esta situación en la que él se encuentra, que siempre está en constante movimiento en diferentes partes del mundo, y que bueno, no le tocó estar directamente en el reensamblaje del equipo, pero bueno, él comenta su experiencia, que dice que había como mucha energía en los bailarines, y que eso le parece como algo que le pareció muy atractivo de específicamente trabajar con este grupo, y su intención era como utilizar toda esa energía para canalizarla, para darle la forma a la obra, y que se convirtiera en una obra que no solo es, digamos, la energía va hacia afuera, hacia el público, sino que también jala a los espectadores y a los danzarines hacia adentro, esta energía, ¿no? Este, menciona que, bueno, para él la creación de una obra no solo es a partir de su visión personal, sino es cómo relaciona, cómo involucra a los bailarines para que se sientan parte del proyecto, que ellos sientan que les está dejando algo la participación en la obra, y por supuesto también la involucración del público, ¿no? Que el público se sienta involucrado, se sienta parte de la obra para sentir esta atracción hacia ella.
Damien, Who are the creators you work with in this performance?
So it's been kind of a 50-50, like people I met from Mexico, Jorge Ballina, that did the set. And I remember 1 year before the creation, I came in and met different artists. And when I met Jorge, it was very clear for me that there was a complete synchronicity between the origin of his ideas and how they were realized. I felt it was also extremely close and extremely well processed. Like I felt sometimes you have creators that have great ideas, but they don't really resist the test of the materialization of it, the test of making those ideas in the real world. And with him, I felt like this is so like crazy how sometimes from your original sketches, your first drawing to the final pictures of the production he's been working, it was of a pretty overwhelming perfection, in the sense that I felt it takes a lot of energy and a lot of you know, you need to have a very strong mind also to manage to get something that precise. So I was very intrigued, and I enjoyed very much our first conversation. So he came actually to Europe when I was somewhere in Munich, I remember, and we had a few days of brainstorming. And I remember that's when we started like really bringing all this idea, and we came with this idea of the parabolic antenna. I really love the fact that he wanted to really make it the biggest scale as possible and not to dim it from. He was like, it's going to be really difficult, but let's try to push this idea to the maximum. In general, I like to work with quite extreme people that are ready to go for the full potential of an idea, and they're not being intimidated by the complexity or the realization of it. So I found a great ally in Jorge, and he's been amazing all the way through. In realizing those ideas and making it the kind of incredible set that he developed for this work. Usually I don't never work really with set designers. I always work with visual artists, but I do consider Jorge, who was an architect first, as a visual artist somehow. So it's been really beautiful to collaborate with him. Victor Zapatero was connected to Jorge, and he also joined the process of making the light. And there again, I found in him a great partner. I'm trying to because it's not so easy, like when you want to create a piece that is so cosmic in a way, to bring back this logic of the cosmos, which is often one source of light. It's like one source of light, one clear shadow. So it cuts a lot of possibilities. You like also this idea of giving this feeling of a sunset, of something that is both cold and warm. I'm glad that both of them got recognized recently for their hard work on this piece. So I think from the Mexican side, they were really like extremely important collaborators. And from the other side, I brought, of course, Emilios, who was like really has been my main partner on most of my creation. He's kind of an alter ego and a muse on so many levels. I brought Jean-Paul Espagna, who kind of stayed most of the residency creation and spent really a lot of time digging. And I think from all the collaboration we've done, that's the one where first I give him the most space, because also I can do piece just with single underwear. There's piece that I don't really use any designer or any designs, but I felt this one needed something kind of, and working with so many colors is also not something I do usually. And he did kind of an amazing work on really developing different identities through the show and helping to create this feeling of a constant transformation. I'm very proud of the work he has done, very proud of him. And I think he's currently in Mexico to just reshape the costumes. And of course, musically, I worked with both again because I had previously worked with them with Marihiko Hara, who's a composer from Kyoto that I had worked previously on Vessel, who also has done an incredible developed musical score for the show, and he did it in collaboration with Ryuichi Sakamoto, the composer, who I know since few years, like nearly 15 years, but in the last, and he left us very like last April, and he, for this piece, he contributed greatly in bringing sounds. He improvised a lot with vibrations, that because the set for him made him think of a cymbal, and he developed a whole series of sound just with vibrations, and brought a huge amount of textures that are now in the piece. He also gave us some raw and stems from his album Async, one of his last album, where that we use also in the piece, like the sonar, like elements that we kind of reconstructed and fuse into the work. And there is also an additional track. In Omphalos was interesting because it's in this creation that I through Emilios I discovered the work of Tim Hacker, who's a Canadian composer, and discovering his work was also kind of groundbreaking for me, because he basically did the music of my next show, one of the show I did after, called Planet Wanderer, where he the whole piece is based on one of his albums, and Omphalos was somehow my connection to him. So this piece also opened the gate to new collaborations. So I guess I don't forget anyone. Catalina has been helping me tremendously in nourishing me in all through the knowledge she had with her parents that are archaeologists, and I felt that she was a really great connection with all this knowledge, that again, that we don't use literally in the piece. It's not a piece about pre-Columbian mythology at all, but there's been many ideas. In general, I'm very inspired by rituals and by mythology, but I never try to reproduce literally any rituals or to quote literally any mythology, but more invent a new one with different elements that are there. I'll let you translate.
Ok. Bueno, le preguntaba a Angie sobre su trabajo, su colaboración con la producción mexicana. Él menciona específicamente a Jorge Ballina y a Víctor Zapatero, con quienes trabajó en todo el desarrollo del escenario. Menciona de Jorge, que con él fue con el que idearon esta cuestión de la antena parabólica. Dice que le lleva mucho la atención como la intención de Jorge de haber hecho el proyecto como mucho más grande, que dice que le gusta trabajar con personas extremas, ¿no? Personas que lo llevan un poquito como a expandir sus límites de capacidad de creación. Bueno, menciona que Víctor y Jorge recibieron el World Stage Design de Calgary 2022, y que bueno, que realmente para él trabajar con ellos fue muy gratificante, y bueno, comparte el gusto por el reconocimiento que recibieron a su trabajo. En cuestión de música, menciona a Marihiko Hara y a Ryuichi Sakamoto, con quienes colaboró en toda la parte de la creación de la música. Menciona específicamente de Ryuichi Sakamoto, que ha colaborado con él a partir de la música de sus últimos discos. De ahí es de donde ha tomado incluso para sus nuevos proyectos. Sí, ha seguido colaborando con esa parte musical. Mencionó también a Tim Hacker, un artista canadiense que también estuvo involucrado en la parte de la música. Y bueno, obviamente Catalina Navarrete en toda la parte, digamos, como de la investigación arqueológica, que dice que si bien en sus obras no pretende tomar específicamente o hacer referencia específica a rituales o a mitos, sí le gusta tomar ideas de toda esta cuestión cultural para transmitirlas en el escenario.
I understand. You use technology on stage, in this case, the huge antenna, to place the dancers in experiences that they cannot fully control and thus show more honest bodies and movements. Is that correct? Tell us about the honesty of bodies and movement. What are you looking for?
I mean, in general, I love to work with limits and to work with putting dancers in a bit of an unknown ground. Uh, what was interesting with the set of Jorge is because at the beginning I was thinking we could also have it with the antenna being really flat and having people all around, except it was not possible to bring this in any kind of theater, and it would have kind of contained any possibility of touring the work abroad. So for that, we needed to kind of bring the antenna kind of like high. And this was actually when we first realized how inclined and how curved the antenna was. It was, I sweat a lot because I felt, oh my God, we did all of this. And it's so hard to dance on this platform. And there was a lot of challenge that came with it. We needed to really understand how to tame this set. I feel that there was like definitely what I liked about it was definitely the change of perspective you get on the dancers and how they had to, it was kind of keeping them on a kind of like, it's kind of a metaphor of a planet also, because the set is very curved inside, and then you can turn it and there's the whole structure behind, the whole skeleton of it, on which the dancer can hang and create this kind of zero gravity feeling. So it brought the metaphor of a world and of an underworld, of being in the world, of being outside of it. And the fact that it was turning create even more, like brought even more this idea of time passing or simply of planetary movement. So it was a really interesting, because depending of the movement of it, you could see dance, even if they would be static, they would still be in movement. And they would be, you could play with having some people on higher perspective and other on lower. So it's a very interesting set to work with. And I think it was a bit of a shock when all the dancers got into it, and we needed to find the right shoes, the right the right coating on the platform, so that they could basically ground themselves. I had previously done this piece just 1 year before, called Skid, that is performed on 34-degree angle, but actually in this one, some angles reach 45 degrees. So it's extremely steep when you get quite high. Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea that we worked with this metaphor. Like when I did one of those trips, I think it was in one of those temples. There's basically, they show you that they will use, like in pre-Columbian culture, they use dishes that they would fill with water, and you would use it to see the stars in reflection of of the water. So they didn't have to look up to observe the sky, they could just look down. So this idea also kind of inspires us with this the placement of the dancers, the kind of constellation it would bring. And just there's a whole scene when they call the stargazing, when they just keep on being constantly like in having this movement towards something that is overwhelming them. Yeah, I mean, all of this made it, what we also really liked was the idea that you could extract things from the ground, so it could also become like a kind of an archaeological site. I like this metaphor that often people look at the sky and they think that we often see the sky and the stars, the symbol of the future. You know, with all the film of science fiction, we often see space as actually the gate to the future. But actually, what we have above us is an archaeological site, because all the lights you get from those stars, they've been emitted sometime millions of years ago. So it's literally, they come from the past. And at the same time, if you look at the ground, that's the future, because potentially things can grow and develop out of it. And I really like this kind of paradox, and to start the piece with this extraction of these cultures from these lords, and to see them starting to get alive and to start extending and transforming, was a really exciting process to really also, I think the piece is a metaphor of time in so many different ways, and of the movements of time, of the relativity of it as well. And I do think that in that sense the set proposed a lot of different readings, and it's also created a world that would be disconnected from this world, because there is this idea of something a little bit curved that is disconnected from the ground. So it has a bit of a floating feeling. It's a very heavy set, but at the same time, it gives us a sense of extreme lightness, because it feels like it's floating in the dark. So yeah, it was a long process to tune.
Bueno, Angie, le pregunto un poco el elemento de la tecnología al incluir la antena, que bueno, Damien especifica que la antena no es una antena parabólica real, pero bueno, habla un poco de este proceso que tuvieron que
Perdón que
hacer
te
para...
interrumpa, Adriana. Y también es que esta antena es una plataforma construida con
Ujú, no,
metal y
no.
madera y pesa 3 toneladas.
Exacto, y todos los retos técnicos que conllevó tener este escenario, ¿no? Desde el material de recubrimiento para que los bailarines pudieran estar ahí, el tipo de zapatos que convenía que utilizaran para tener esta sensación de movimiento. Y bueno, menciona de manera muy interesante cómo la metáfora, digamos, que representa este escenario. Dice que había probado algo similar en una obra previa que se llama Skid, que usó también un escenario inclinado. Y bueno, estos retos de que al tener una inclinación de 45 grados, el tipo de movimiento que le da a los bailarines y al escenario mismo, ¿no? Menciona que le llama mucho la atención cómo se utilizaban también recipientes cóncavos llenos de agua para ver el reflejo de las estrellas, ¿no? Y es toda esta parte del manejo del tiempo, que cuando generalmente vemos hacia las estrellas, hacia el espacio, tenemos esta noción de que es el futuro, ¿no? Un poco por la influencia de la ciencia ficción, pero bueno, pensamos en el espacio como el futuro cuando él menciona que es realmente más bien una experiencia arqueológica, ¿no? Estamos viendo hacia el pasado, estamos descubriendo cosas que ocurrieron hace millones de años, ¿no? Y al contrario, cuando vemos hacia el suelo, hacia la tierra, es el futuro porque es de donde pueden crecer cosas, ¿no? De donde crecen las posibilidades, vienen desde el suelo, ¿no? Y dice que a la vez el hecho de tener esta parábola en el escenario permite que es una esfera como si fuera algo ajeno, como si fuera otro mundo, un mundo que está en una especie de situación flotante, que es un poquito como un mundo propio, ¿no? Un cosmos propio del escenario, pero que a fin de cuentas se relaciona con el tiempo, ¿no? Con la relatividad del tiempo, el cómo experimentamos el tiempo.
I have too many questions. I'd like to talk with you more, but we need to close this interview. So tell us, why do people have to go to watch Omphalos at Conjunto Santander?
Why? Good question. I mean, because I would, first of all, I know that if I could, I would really love to be there, because I really loved watching this piece, and them. I do think that that the piece is an experience. I do think it's something that we've been really working really hard on pushing pushing the envelope and trying to really bring to create something unique, and by this, fusing all this creative mind together, and working really hard with this group of people. I think the dancers are really at work in this piece. There is something where they need to be extremely in sync and bound and centered in order to perform it, because the piece is actually really hard to perform. And I do think, just for this reason, it creates something that is not so common to see, just to see such connection. And I do think that the piece opens a gate to another kind of another place, gives you a perspective, like from the feedback we got and I think the piece is back because people really wanted to see it again. So if you missed it in 2018, I think it's a really great occasion finally discover it live. And I do think that people might have seen images of it, but I think it's only by experiencing it live that you can truly understand what Omphalos is, and that you know that you can truly experience the work. So that's why I think it's worth going.
Y bueno, Angie le pregunta finalmente, bueno, dice que hay muchas más preguntas que le gustaría hacerle. Ciertamente ha sido una conversación muy interesante, pero bueno, específicamente le comenta por qué la gente debería ir a ver esta obra, Ónfalos. Y bueno, él dice que a él personalmente le encantaría poder estar aquí nuevamente, pero bueno, dice que es una experiencia muy interesante. Menciona que es una obra difícil de bailar, por lo que es una experiencia muy especial. Dice que se abre una especie por las experiencias que han recibido, los comentarios que han recibido de las diferentes presentaciones de la obra. Menciona que para mucha gente se abre una especie de portal a otro lugar, ¿no? Es transportar a la audiencia a un lugar especial en el tiempo y en el espacio, ¿no? Y bueno, definitivamente eso hace que valga mucho la pena verla.
Okay, if you have a couple of minutes before to say goodbye, I would like to know how Omphalos was received in Europe. Do you remember any anecdotes?
Yeah. I remember, for me, what was really moving was the first time we did it in Hamburg, in Camp Nagel, where I'm actually going to bring a work back in December. And we had this wall of people, and really 1,200 people. And for me, I remember how the piece was received in Mexico, but to bring it to a really different culture was like kind of also like I was wondering how, but I remember how, how much warmth dancers received in each place we performed. I remember in Rennes how moved and the audience was, and how they were moved by receiving so much so much love from the audience. It was very moving, also because it felt like two worlds meeting. It felt like there was they came from somewhere and they were somewhere else, and in Mexico I felt it there was they were coming from this place, so it resonated differently. But in Europe there was suddenly a different perspective on the work. So yeah, I can't wait that the show goes back to tour and start to get into other places, and that they keep on. COVID kind of interrupted a lot of the of this tour, but I think now the fact that this work is back, and I do think that there is the world has changed also since the time we created it. So sometimes I'm not always I don't often think that, because performing art is very ephemeral. Often it exists, it's created on the moment, and it has a tour of 2 years, 3 years. But I love when some piece can, and I'm trying right now to bring back a lot of work from the past, because I think you watch them from a different perspective, but they can really they can really inform us. They can really tell us things, even if they haven't been made immediately. And I think this piece is already 5 years old. And I think the dancers, most of the dancers, the 3/4 of the dancers that are back, I think they will have changed. So they will also bring that experience on stage. And I think the fact also that we are, I guess, Omphalos talks about also our vulnerability and our presence, our human presence. And I think we're living in a time where we start also understanding this vulnerability and this uncertainty also. So that's why I think works that have a kind of a cosmic perspective, something that can transcend the problems that we experiences with, like, the in culture, like, in daily life, and like it's I think this piece gives a vantage point, and I think sometimes seeing things from a vantage point can give you not only a feeling, soothe you in a way, but also helps you to have a different perspective on what you experience. So that's why I hope this piece now will keep on traveling and touring, and meet different kind of culture also, because that's one of the most beautiful thing about performing, is that you can actually confront other cultures and it's always going to be a different experience.
Bueno, le pregunta Angie cómo recuerda que fue la reacción en Europa de la obra. Damien menciona que si bien fue una experiencia distinta a como se recibió en México, dice que específicamente en Capnagel en Hamburgo y en Rennes en Francia, que realmente fue una experiencia muy apreciada por el público. Dice que le parece muy interesante cómo desde las artes escénicas se puede confrontar a diferentes culturas, las experiencias, la manera en que viven las diferentes obras, varía obviamente de cultura en cultura, y que bueno, también a través del tiempo, ¿no? Menciona que las artes escénicas le parecen un arte efímero, pero a fin de cuentas el mundo ha cambiado, los mismos bailarines han cambiado en estos años, pero siempre se tiene una experiencia distinta, ¿no? A través del tiempo de la misma obra.
Agradezco mucho a Adriana Esparza por su hermoso trabajo de traducción, a Eleno Guzmán de Moves, a Irlanda Tostado del Conjunto Santander de Artes Escénicas, a Salvador Martínez, el productor de Corpusapiens, que estuvo aquí también en apoyo. Gracias a todas las personas que se conectaron. Espero que hayan disfrutado de esta conversación. Les mando un abrazo y nos vemos allá.
Podcastera.mx presentó.
Esta temporada de Corpusapiens es producida con el apoyo de la Jefatura de Danza de la Secretaría de Cultura de Jalisco.